Welcome to our 10th of this year's collaborations with Riot Games for Latin America. If you want to catch these guides in Spanish, then be sure to check out their channel here. When it comes to team fighting, one of the biggest problems players face is how one-dimensionally they approach them. Almost everyone just blindly fully commits, presses all their buttons, and just prays that things work out. Of course, it's hard to blame people for doing this. Team fighting is insanely difficult, so it's hard to see any other way to go about it. Thing is, it doesn't have to be that way. There are actually a ton of easy to implement tips that can immediately make you a much better team fighter, with one of the first being a complete mentality shift around them. Let's try and compare how players approach team fighting to trading during the laning phase. Do you mindlessly just run at your enemy and hope that whatever you do works? No, of course not. You generally try to think things through and take it a bit more slowly. How many minions are there? How do our champions interact with one another? Which cooldowns do they have available, etc. Now, you may not know exactly how things will play out every trade, but if you have the correct approach, you'll know that more often than not, you'll come out ahead. Team fighting is essentially the same. It's impossible to know how each fight is going to play out, but with 3 fundamentals that we'll teach today, you should be able to lead your team to victories far more often. The first and most important concept to learn is simply learning how to create and play around space that you or your teammates create. Space is the term that players have come up with to describe when you're more able to freely damage your enemies. The simplest example of this that everyone can understand would be having a tank in front of you as a carry. Being in front, the tank provides space by absorbing incoming damage, thus you the carry are able to deal damage safely. It's not just tanks that can do this though. Anyone can provide space for their teammates, and this is where a lot of the nuance from team fighting can come from. The reason we brought up trading before is that you can think of team fighting in a different way. It may sound incredibly obvious, but your goal in a fight shouldn't be to just run at your opponent and hope that you kill them. This is what most players do and why teamfights end up being so chaotic. You should make an active effort to both maximize the damage that your team is dealing while also minimizing how much damage your overall team is taking, and this is where the concept of space comes in. Let's draw up an example to clarify. Imagine 2 teams fighting in the mid lane. On the red team, a Scion charges in to engage, while on the blue team, the Akali moves forward to fight. She sets up her shroud while her teammates gang up on Scion. Here's an interesting question. Even if you don't play Akali, what do you think she should do in this situation? What Scion is doing in this fight is atrociously bad, because he's giving Akali the option to do something very simple. The answer we were looking for is literally do nothing but sit in shroud. Think about it. As a tank, Scion doesn't do much outside of soaking damage and CCing, but he's on his own, so he's taking damage for free. He's accomplishing absolutely nothing. But why does this mean that Akali should do nothing, you may wonder? Shouldn't she try to assassinate a squishy target? Well, she simply doesn't need to. If she sits in her shroud in front of the enemy team, they can't walk past her. You don't want to flank yourself and walk past an assassin with 4 squishy members, it's just not great. Which means that the 4 enemy members literally can't do anything, and that's the reason why Akali should not try to kill anyone. If your opponent is taking free damage while their teammates can't do anything, then why should you as Akali give them the option of hitting you? Yes, Akali could potentially kill someone, but there's no reason to. Her team already has a massive advantage by being able to hit Scion right now, while the enemy team is unable to hit anyone. Thus, the assassin is in a way providing more space to their teammates than the actual tank is, simply by the way they played the fight. Without a doubt, this is by far one of the biggest issues that players have in regards to teamfighting. You don't need to be optimal in how you deal damage. If you just keep this concept in mind, you'll be a better teamfighter than most players. Let's take a look at a game from Masters ELO where players are bound to be good at teamfighting, right? The fight initiates with Echo going over a wall to deal damage to Jarvan. This is exactly what the Scion did in our previous example. Echo is giving the entire enemy team a free target to hit, while not providing his team anything at all. That's because all of the blue side team is too far to make use of Echo's distraction. The fight is over as soon as it's begun, but Jarvan has greed in his eyes. He sees the enemy team clump up, gets a massive ultimate off, and dies instantly. Hopefully you can see the comparison between this clip and the previous example that we went over and why we recommended that Akali do nothing in the first example. Jarvan and his team got a complete freebie from the enemy Echo diving face first into the middle of all of them. The blue team could do absolutely nothing about the fact that their teammate did that. Jarvan unfortunately suffers from the tunnel vision of optimal CC and damage that is such a huge culprit in players throwing fights. Just because you can get off big crowd control doesn't mean anything if your teammates can't do anything off of it. It's doubly worse if you're handing your opponent someone to hit for no reason. Jarvan could have just stood by his team and killed Echo for free, and the blue team would have been stuck doing nothing. You always want to be asking yourself, what can my teammates do off of the play that I'm making, but at the same time, what can my opponents do off of it as well? You'll find that it becomes much clearer what you should be doing in fights this way. We quickly want to address that you may be led to believe that this concept only applies to frontline champions and only they can provide space, but no. The ability to set up your teammates and deny plays from your opponents is applicable to all roles. As an example, while Veigar is great for deleting squishy targets, one of the main strengths is his ability to create space for his teammates to easily deal damage while zoning opponents with his cage. Try to keep in mind a visual representation such as this. Oftentimes, optimal damage or CC comes at the cost of your team taking a lot of damage themselves. It's better to do a bit less if it means that your opponents don't get to hit you freely. Once you start thinking about teamfights this way, you'll improve dramatically and win them way more consistently. Our second major fundamental is going to be about target selection, another consistent thing that players get wrong when it comes to fighting. In solo queue, one of the most prominent things that you're ever going to hear is, focus their carry guys, come on. Without a doubt, this is one of the biggest baits that makes players play out fights incredibly poorly. So why is that? Well, for this topic, let's actually shift gears and try to envision the game in a simpler way. Let's break down League of Legends champions into medieval units, such as swordsmen and archers. Imagine that you're approaching your opponents. In front, they have a bunch of swordsmen guarding their archers in the back. If you're a swordsman on the other side, do you just ignore the enemy front line and run straight toward their archers? Of course not. You'd just get sliced down the moment you tried to do that. And yet, this is one of the most recurring problems we see all the time from a bunch of players. People go absolutely mental trying to reach an enemy carry. It's not like your opponents are just going to let you do that for free all the time. You need to wait for proper moments where you've either found a good opportunity or when they miss position so poorly that you can easily get on top of them to score a kill. Or even better, say that you had some nice cavalry waiting in the sidelines, aka an assassin, ready to flank the enemy archers once the fight has begun. Lastly, there's another consideration here for you to take in. Carries are only as good as the team that is supporting them. One of the main reasons that players are so tunnel visioned on killing carries is because they're the most threatening enemy members, right? But you should try to think of enemy carries as a trebuchet. Think about a nice, beautiful trebuchet tucked away safely behind some castle walls. As you try to siege, it's raining massive boulders at you, making life miserable. Now, consider that very same trebuchet, but for some inexplicable reason placed outside of the castle walls. Not so threatening now, is it? It's completely exposed, so it's going to get overrun instantly. That concept translates perfectly over to League of Legends. While you would ideally like to kill the enemy carries from the start, it's often just as good to kill the allies protecting them as it is to kill them directly. A carry without peel and support is just an exposed trebuchet. It's unlikely that they'll be able to do any further harm to you and will probably just retreat to safety to wait for their allies to respawn. The final thing that you need to understand about fighting is how each type of team composition beats each other in rock, paper, scissors fashion. Generally, we'd say that there are three types of champions when it comes to team fighting: engage, disengage, and poke. Engaged champions are obviously characters that have powerful all-in capabilities such as Camille, Ashe, Alistar, etc. Disengaged champions are ones with great defensive or zone control types of abilities. Braum, while he can engage, is one of the premier disengaged champions in the game. He works best when the opponent is running into him and he can counter their play. Then there are less obvious ones, such as Anivia or Victor, with powerful zone control abilities, making it incredibly difficult for the enemy team to engage without their lives being miserable. Or perhaps a champion like Kindred with her ultimate. She can turn the tides of an engage very quickly with an ability that literally prevents death. Hopefully you get the gist of what we're getting at. Any champion that generally dissuades their opponent from fully committing to a fight falls under the disengage category. Lastly, there are poke-based champions who want to harass you from incredibly far away. This is the most obvious of the bunch, as we're sure you know that this includes stuff like Ezreal, Zoe, Jace, etc. As we said, these categories counter each other for the most part. Engage counters poke, since champions with good all-in abilities will not give long-range champions the time to get poke damage off before a fight. Since engage is a poke comp's biggest weakness, it should go without saying that disengage comps are really punished by poke-based champions. Without the tools to engage, they will just get poked down before a fight begins every single time. That weakness is made up by the fact that disengage comps will thrive against engage comps, since their entire purpose is to foil their opponent's engages. As you can see, each type of composition has its strengths and weaknesses, which is what makes League such a compelling game. Okay, so what's the point in covering this? It's good to know, but it's not realistic to solo queue, right? Well, the odds of having team comps filled with only one category of champion is certainly extremely low. More often than not, you'll get a mix of champions wanting to do different things. That's essentially the point that we want to get at. You shouldn't hope your teammates play fights appropriately. It's on you to try the best to adapt and to work with them as well as you possibly can. Here's an example of a player too tunnel visioned on what their own champion wants to do that they don't care to think about what their teammates can accomplish. This Diana has a Xerath and Jace on her team. Meanwhile, the enemy has almost zero reliable engage champions. Although Diana is a powerful all-in champ, she could give her poke teammates a bit of time to get some damage off and play to their strengths before fully committing to a fight. As her Xerath uses his ultimate to poke the enemy off the inhib, she instead takes it as a sign to fully commit and die completely for free. If she had just understood the rock, paper, scissors of team comps and adapted to what both teams could do, she'd realize that the enemy team had almost zero answer to pre-fight poke. She can easily hold off on engaging until the fight looks better from Xerath's poke. Instead, she gives away her life for free, initiated a poor fight, and instead of this being a game-winning push, the game is just delayed further for no reason. Let's compare that to one of the best teamfight adaptations we've ever seen from a professional player on an incredibly linear champion, Malphite. The Big Rock is one of the premier engage champions in the game. His ultimate is absolutely insane for getting on top of the enemy team and locking them down. But Cloud9's Fudge made a great read on this teamfight. Is there something that you can notice about some of the enemy team's champions? So all of them other than Orianna are short-ranged engage champions that like to fully commit, right? And what are engaged champions weak to? Disengage. So instead of using his ultimate and forcing his teammates to go into his opponents, Fudge realizes that he can just hold it to peel instead for when someone on the enemy team inevitably commits, and voila, an easy one teamfight. Adapting to every single game and coming up with the best teamfighting strategy isn't easy, but you should at least make a conscious effort to think about both what your own team wants to accomplish and what the enemy team wants to do as well. Given enough practice doing so, you'll start seeing different strategies going into teamfights, and well, the results will speak for themselves. Teamfighting is without a doubt one of, if not the hardest skills to truly master in this game. We're not expecting you to become a teamfighting master overnight, but if you follow these 3 fundamentals from now on, you'll definitely perform better in critical fights compared to most players who don't think about anything at all before engaging with their team. And if you want to keep learning to do similar things to improve fast and get the rank that you've always wanted, then check out SkillCapped.com, link in the description below. Best of luck in your games, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.